the Archdiocese of Seattle, Washington. The story of the faith in this region began with the missionary activity of holy bishops, grew rapidly with the assistance of saintly religious sisters, and carries on today under the leadership of Archbishop Paul D. Aitchen.
God has been so good to me, and I don't know that I can ever be as grateful as I need to be for that. God has given me faith, and I'm one of the lucky ones that God gave an abundance of faith.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America.
Sitting on the shores of Puget Sound, nestled between the beautiful Olympic and Cascade mountain ranges, is the city of Seattle, Sea City of the Archdiocese of Seattle.
Well, the Archdiocese of Seattle is the entire western half of the state, from Canada down to Oregon, from the Cascade Mountains over west to the Pacific. It's just a beautiful part of God's creation.
Boeing, Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, and before that, long before that, United Parcel. I mean, so many things came out of Seattle. There's an entrepreneurial spirit here that's very alive and has been for a long time.
I think Seattle is really an amazing place to be, and it's an amazing place to be Catholic because it's such a diverse community. Right from the very beginning, diversity has been one of the real characteristic aspects of Seattle because it is such a mix of people.
First real missionary efforts in the Pacific Northwest began in the 1830s with Francois Norbert Blanchet and Modeste Demers, who were two priests from French Canada. They were sent out to this region at the invitation from both the settlers of the Oregon country and from Native American people themselves, who'd heard about Black Robes from other tribes and wanted instruction in the faith.
These two priests had a tireless spirit and a commitment to evangelizing not only the Native American communities that they found, but also those immigrant communities who had moved into the region looking for a better life.
Francois Norbert Blanchet was named Vicar Apostolic, and somewhere along the way, he had a brainstorm. He felt this region needed bishops to lead it. He became the first Archbishop of Oregon City. His brother, Augustin Magloire Alexandre Blanchet, became the first bishop of Walla Walla, and then Demers, his fellow missionary, became the first bishop of Vancouver Island.
Augustine Blanchet served as the Bishop of Walla Walla for a while, but due to tensions in the region following the Whitman Massacre of 1847, the Diocese of Walla Walla was abandoned in 1850. It was reestablished, and on May 31st, Pope Pius XI created the Diocese of Nisqually. A few months later, in January of 1851, Augustine Blanchet dedicated St. James Church near Fort Vancouver as the new diocese cathedral. A second St. James would be built in 1885, which still stands today in the city of Vancouver as the pro-cathedral of the Archdiocese.
Many religious orders helped to establish a Catholic presence in Washington state. Among the most lauded were the Sisters of Providence, a French-Canadian order who arrived in 1856 and quickly established a number of schools, hospitals, orphanages, and committed themselves to doing the work of charity.
In 1856, Mother Joseph and 4 sisters were sent to the Northwest. A little cabin was built for the sisters. Now, when you see a picture of this little cabin, they had the sisters' convent, the school, the orphanage, and they cared for an ill man in that cabin as well. So that was like a hospital, the beginning of a hospital.
Bishop Junger, the second bishop of the diocese, really considered Mother Joseph the co-founder of the diocese because of the incredible work that she did and that she led.
When Bishop O'Day was appointed the Bishop of Nisqually in 1896, in that same year, we have the beginnings of the Alaska Gold Rush. Now, the Gold Rush transformed Seattle into a boomtown almost overnight. In response, Bishop O'Day decided to move the seat of his diocese from Nisqually to Seattle. He moved his residence in 1903 and immediately started planning for a new cathedral.
The churches that Bishop O'Day established are almost all on hilltops, and that's, easy to do in Seattle. There's lots of hills. But when he chose the site for the cathedral, he said, "This is the best spot for a cathedral on the West Coast, if not in the entire United States," because it was such a grand and prominent place on the city skyline.
He brought Heinz Lafarge. They were the premier cathedral architects, and not just cathedral, they did the state capitol in New York. They began work in 1905, took them about 2 years, and he dedicated on December 22nd of 1907.
Tragedy struck less than a decade after the cathedral's dedication, when the dome of the building collapsed under a heavy snow in February 1916. The crash shattered the windows, filled the church with rubble, and crushed the pulpit.
The pastor, Father William Noonan, an Irishman, stood surveying, probably stood about where I'm sitting today, with the editor of the Catholic Northwest Progress. He said to him, "Willem, not a word of this to the press." Seattle had 3 dailies in those days, and it was the front page of each one of them the next day. It was a big event in Seattle. Well, it took about 1.5 years to rebuild the building, and they chose not to replace the dome.
Bishop O'Day was a true shepherd. He guided the diocese through the turmoil of World War I, through financial difficulties, and the anti-Catholic sentiment engendered by the Ku Klux Klan. Like the bishops before him, O'Day also had the assistance of dedicated sisters and religious. Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini, the great Italian missionary to the United States, and her missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart arrived in Seattle in 1903.
Over the years, Mother Cabrini came to Seattle 3 times. In the first visit, she established the Mission to Italians on Beacon Hill. The second visit, she established a school in North Seattle. And then the third visit, she established Columbus Hospital. Those 3 visits to Seattle left a huge mark on the city. And so a number of her institutions are still in existence.
Post-World War II was another boom time in Seattle. Thomas Connolly succeeds Bishop Shaughnessy as the bishop, and in 1951, the diocese is elevated to an archdiocese.
He raised the profile of the church, I think, in a really good way. He was a handsome, Irishman with a lot of charm. His years were marked by a lot of growth, and he was responsive to the post-war growth in a good way.
After Archbishop Connolly, Archbishop Hunthausen came in 1975. He really became a lightning rod in the United States around the issue of nuclear disarmament. He was entirely committed that nuclear disarmament was the way forward.
He was a strong servant leader, deeply spiritual man, very prophetic, very courageous, and very outspoken. His whole ministry was really directed toward serving the poor and developing a social conscience among the people.
Archbishop Hunthausen was joined by Archbishop Thomas Murphy in 1987, who served as his coadjutor until 1991 when Archbishop Hunthausen retired.
And he brought a different kind of presence. He had a great passion to reach out to the Native Americans, for one thing, and to the logging communities where they were having a lot of trouble, a lot of layoffs. Those poor communities, he became their champion. He was a great champion of Catholic education. And he had a great outreach to young adults, young people. He died too soon of leukemia, was replaced by Alexander Burnett. And he was a great champion of Catholic education too, and supported Catholic community services and their great growth. And then the last one was Archbishop Peter Sarton, who was a deeply spiritual man himself, had a great outreach to priests. But he did have an impact that I think was deeply spiritual impact.
From the earliest days of the church in the Pacific Northwest, bishops have played a central role in sanctifying, teaching, and guiding their flock. And throughout the Archdiocese history, the mother church and center of liturgical prayer has been St. James Cathedral. Over the years, it has gone through a number of renovations, the most recent of which took place in the early 1990s under Pastor Father Michael Ryan.
I came here in 1988. The Archbishop told me that among my priorities needed to be a renovation of the cathedral. And we took a very slow approach to it, because when you touch people's worship space, you're touching something, a nerve center for sure. The more we talked about that and looked at this building, it seemed like the place for the altar in this building was not at the end where it used to be, but in the middle. The architecture of the building supported that.
In this cathedral, with that altar, such a magnificent structure, in the center of the worshiping community, it clearly demonstrates that from that font flows our life.
Over the altar is an oculus, a skylight, at the base of which are words from Luke's Gospel in the 22nd chapter, part of the Last Supper story. The words, "I am in your midst as one who serves." It's become a parish motto, and it's a reminder to us who we are. So, and the other thing I would say, you can't worship in this building, especially when we're full tilt and we can fill the building with 1,000 people, without knowing your community, because you're all gathered around that altar and around the pulpit too, where the word is preached.
On the exteriors of the cathedral, the 167-foot towers are a visible reminder to the people of Seattle that God is in their midst. The 6 bells at the top of the South Tower ring out daily as a call to prayer. The bronze doors at the front of the church are the work of sculptor Ulrich Himm. They depict the journey of humanity towards the heavenly city, Jerusalem, from the creation of Adam and Eve all the way to the book of Revelation. Upon entry through these grand doors, one is greeted by the baptistry. This speaks to us of the primacy of baptism as the first sacrament and the beginning of the Christian life.
I love the Blessed Sacrament Chapel, and the tabernacle is the theme of the burning bush. Take your shoes off, you're standing on holy ground. I love to go in there and be reminded of the holy ground that this place is. I also like the Mary Shrine with all the candles. It's kind of a grotto-like. The statue in there is a gift to the cathedral from my own family, so that has special meaning to me.
The statues that are here of the Blessed Mother, of St. Joseph, of the Lord himself are powerful. But my favorite piece is actually in the side chapel. It's not in the main body. It's that image of Our Lady of Seattle. And I still like to pop in and offer prayer of devotion and prayer for these people and seek her intercession. And perhaps one of the most symbolic features of the cathedral is the cathedra. The chair really does represent the authority of the bishop. We've got a very beautiful cathedra here in the Archdiocese and in the Cathedral of St. James in Seattle. The role of bishop can be very isolating. And so I like the fact that the cathedra in this cathedral it's in the congregation as we worship God together, as we seek God together, as we serve God together.
Archbishop Paul D. Aitchen, the 6th Archbishop of Seattle, was born to a large Catholic family in Tell City, Indiana.
I have 5 brothers and sisters. 3 of my brothers and sisters and myself chose religious vocations. 3 priests and a Benedictine nun. But equally important, the other 2 are married and have raised their families. My mom had a great devotion to Our Lady. And, Mom studied with the Benedictine sisters at their academy in Ferdinand in high school. And everybody thought Mom was going into the convent as well. But her senior year was a holy year. And her oldest brother, who was already a priest, called her and said, "Sis, I'm going to go to Europe for the Holy Year, and I'd like you to come with me." But when she got to Lourdes, she told the Blessed Mother, "You can't have me, but you can have all my kids." And I think therein lies the real reason why all 6 of us, our faith is so important to us. And the Blessed Mother is so clearly a part of that. And we just grew up with priests and nuns and seminarians around all the time. It was just, they were part of the family. I was never really attracted to the priesthood. It was not something I desired. In those days, I wanted to fly jets for the Navy and get married and have a big family and eventually become a self-made businessman. I didn't even want to go to college. I managed a clothing store right out of high school for 5 years, bought a house when I was 18, and tried my darndest to get married and to have a family. But again, God just kept moving me in my life, and eventually I did realize I needed a college education, and I sold my house and I quit my job, went to Bellarmine College in Louisville. But it was there that my heart finally began to open up a little bit to what God was calling me to consider as a priest. So I did my last 2 years of college at St. John Vianney Seminary in St. Paul. But again, my senior year, I discerned priesthood was not where God was calling me. I still felt very attracted to marriage. So I left. I ended up getting hired to work at the Bishops' Conference in Washington, D.C. to help coordinate the 1987 papal visit of Pope John Paul II to the United States. But even in those days, I was about this close to getting engaged. That relationship came to a natural conclusion after the papal visit was over with, and I eventually said, okay, we'll go back to the seminary.
After his ordination as a priest for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis on June 27, 1992, Father Aitchin served as a pastor for several parishes, vocation director and vice rector of the Bishop Simon Brute College Seminary.
So priesthood really is about walking with God's people. We talk about theologically the 3 offices of the priesthood and being sanctifying and teaching and governing. But I really relate, well, now as a bishop to all 3, certainly, but as a priest, that role of sanctifying and teaching and being taught by the people of God through their faith. I remember one day being called out very early in the morning to the hospital to anoint the guy who was dying, an older man, and his wife and her sister greeted me at the entrance to the hospital. And she apologized profusely for getting me up so early in the morning. I said, you know, I get up this early a lot of times just to go hunting. And I said, I can get up this early to come anoint your husband as he's dying. And without skipping a beat, she told me, well, Father, now you're going hunting for a soul. And it was just a marvelous understanding of the role of the church, the role of the priest in the sacraments at the time of death. But really, for priests, that's what our sanctifying office is all about, is saving souls.
On October 19, 2009, Father Aitchin was appointed Bishop of the Diocese of Cheyenne by Pope Benedict XVI. He served there until October 4, 2016, when he was appointed 4th Archbishop of Anchorage by Pope Francis.
It's not an easy process, allowing God to strip away our false notions of self so that we can see ourselves as God sees us and can live with the freedom that Christ has won for us. And so priesthood was really the first step of giving God that freedom to work in my life as he chose. And then when the call came to become a bishop, it meant leaving behind family, support systems, a community of friends, and to a certain extent, kind of leaving Father Paul behind. There was a letting go in that, but again, a trust that somehow or another God was going to provide for that. And my 7 years in Wyoming were a marvelous experience. I learned there too that God will provide. And then that very surprising call naming me an archbishop and Archbishop of Anchorage. The nuncio wasn't the one that called me, it was one of the priests at the nunciature. And I told him, I said, I'm not sure I can accept this appointment. So I spent a very sleepless night that night in my chapel. There was a sense of peace that just came over me. And I no more walked back in the residence and the nunciature was calling again, wanting my answer. And I remember telling him, it's like, well, Father, even though my head and my gut are a wreck, my heart is at peace, so I will say yes. But God took me very deeply within myself during that time in Alaska. And in all of these experiences, God just keeps building up for the next thing He's going to ask of you.
Archbishop Aitchen was appointed Archbishop of Seattle on September 3, 2019 by Pope Francis.
We're about 168 parishes and missions and 75 schools, Catholic schools, one of the largest Catholic charities operations in the country, our Catholic housing services and our Catholic community services. It's incredible. And one of the things that I'm very proud of as the Archbishop of Seattle. We're blessed to have 22 seminarians at this time, and we have a rich array of lay men and women who minister, side by side with the ordained and religious. The bottom line is 99% of the church is laity, and we all share in the mission of Jesus. I'm 61 years old now, been a priest almost 29 years and a bishop 11 of those. And Jesus tells us in the gospel on numerous occasions, if you wish to follow me, you must take up your cross daily. And St. Paul, I think, is one of the saints helping me to finally, I'm a slow learner, get to this point where I see the cross as what it truly is, the source of life. There's no getting to that without the cross. I've never doubted that presence of the Lord in His church. I do have my doubts, don't get me wrong, but they are more in terms of what I am capable of doing for the Lord as His priest or as His bishop. But faith is a gift, and I'm one of the lucky ones that God gave an abundance of faith.